Hello, my name's Robin Vincent and welcome to Molten Music Technology. Today I'm reviewing the Native Instruments Komplete Kontrol S49. It's a MIDI controller keyboard and so much more. Native Instruments have designed it to complement their complete suite of extraordinary instruments, synthesizers and sampler type soundy things. But that's not all. It also handles third-party plugins and has elements of DAW control built into it. And it can even work alongside Maschine. It's not supposed to be a dumb MIDI keyboard, but it can do that too. It's got knobs and buttons and things that can all be mapped for MIDI control. But the question is it any good? Is it any good? Well, that's what we're here to find out. And actually, the question's not that good a question because it depends on what you mean by that. Because as a physical piece of gear, I'm sure it's great. I mean, it's got keys and buttons and things. Yeah, it's great. I'm less interested in that and more interested in how the workflow works. Can I use the facilities of this keyboard to work better within the instruments that I'm using or within the DAW? Can I access sounds? Can I complete this huge bundle of enormous sounds and interesting stuff? Can I tame it within this keyboard? Are the controls usable? Does it pull you in? Does it reject you? Do the screens make an enormous difference, or are they kind of really superfluous? And ultimately, is this the sort of keyboard that you want to get for your own musical environment? Well, hopefully I can answer some of those questions. It's a big chunk of keyboard. It is plastic, like most synthesizers are plastic, but then it is that sort of plastic. Let me just bring in my Bass Station 2 here for comparison. You know, this sort of plastic, that's pretty much what it is. It's good quality plastic. It's not metal, but it is hefty. It does have a heft to it, a weight to it. It's not going anywhere. Those feet at the bottom grippy to your desktop. So it's physically, as far as mass goes, it's good. It's a good, chunky, solid feeling keyboard. The keyboard itself is a Fatar keyboard bed, semi-weighted, which means it's a little sort of clunky, but in a good way. It has a solid feel to it. And the aftertouch, I have to say, is really intentional. It's there, you can feel it. It doesn't seem to come on by accident. So all in all, as far as this keyboard goes, it feels great. It feels like a high-end synthesizer. Doesn't feel like a plasticky MIDI controller. It's perhaps a little bigger than ideally I want on the desktop, but then it's got a lot of stuff to get in. I mean, part of that extra size is to do with the rather alarmingly huge modulation and pitch wheels over here. Now, on the Mark I keyboard, which I've not used, but they decided to put those strange control strips rather than modulation and pitch wheels on it, and everybody went mental, like they've murdered the art of keyboard pitch shifting. So Native Instruments listened to that and have come back with the most enormous pitch and modulation wheels you have ever seen. I mean, they're wider than your finger. I mean, they feel good, they're solid, they're there, they're rubberized. I mean, they've kind of gone, right, you want pitch and modulation wheels? There, have that. There you go. Don't ever complain again. And they've still got a control strip here at the bottom for which I've yet to find a use. But I'm sure it's useful to somebody somewhere. But anyway, let's return to the layout here. The lines, the angles, the matte-ness of the shell is really very, very pleasing. The buttons feel nice. The corners, the layout of them, it's very, very clean. And then you have this awesome sense of blackness. You have black buttons with black labels that light up black to tell you something is going on. And then they sink back into the black background when not in use. This is initially quite a strange thing. When you're poking around with a keyboard for the first time, you just want to prod buttons and see what happens. With the S49, it doesn't let you do that. It absorbs the buttons back into the background. It doesn't literally do that, but that's what it seems to do. And it's quite initially annoying, but then after a while you realize, yeah, it's actually quite brilliant. You have to decide to trust the S49 in that it knows what it wants to give you and it gives you the controls relevant to what it is that you're doing. So you never find yourself stabbing at buttons sort of willy-nilly. Only the ones you need to use are there. Now you can't really get a sense of that in this light, so I'm just going to turn my video lights off just to give you a sense of what that looks like. I hope you can see now the layout of the keyboard. It's only got a couple of lights sort of lit, and this is because we're on the MIDI control page, which has the least amount of lights going on. And you can see the lovely blue of the LightGuide, which we'll come to at some point if I can ever find out what it really sort of does. But if I press another button over here, different things will light up. Did you see that change? And in normal lighting, it absolutely feels like those buttons completely vanish. They're just not there. And there's a whole set of buttons here which you don't use except for in Maschine. And they don't ever light up at any other time, and you just completely forget that they're there. The screens here are beautiful. They look great. They shine nicely, particularly in normal light. 8 buttons here, which are a little bit nondescript, to be honest. And 8 white buttons here, which don't seem to do a whole lot, but we'll look into that. And then on the right, we have sort of a multi-purpose, turny, pointy, stabby type joysticky knob thing. The LightGuide here, as I mentioned, which is also in the version 1 keyboard, is rather jolly, and we'll see if that has any use at all in a bit. And lastly, the whole thing is USB powered. Now that's the sort of thing you kind of expect it to be. It's a MIDI controller keyboard, of course it's USB powered. However, the original version, the Mark I, was not, and that caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. So it's quite important to point out that this one is fully USB powered, all just going into my Surface here. And I would like to point out at this point that I am running this purely on my Surface Pro 2017. It seems to be the ideal companion. I can sit it up here, it's a touch screen, directly connected to just this. I've got this and that, and a little audio interface over here, which is feeding the sound into my system. The beauty of having this touch interface here is that I don't really ever have to drop to the mouse. I mean, one of the reasons for this keyboard and its connection and integration with Komplete software is so that you don't need to drop to keyboard and mouse to do it. But there are things occasionally that you do. But because I have the touchscreen here, I don't even need to do that. I can just reach my finger out and move things about in the software. It's awesome. It's a great combination. And hopefully you'll see a bit of what I mean during the course of this video. Right, this is a hardware and software combination. It's not a workstation keyboard by itself. There's no sounds in here. This is an empty vessel ready and waiting to be filled by its connection and integration with software. That software is called Komplete Kontrol. It's kind of an editor librarian for all of the native instruments, synths and sounds, and it also supports third-party plugins. Everything you need to do with the keyboard is accessed through this software. And much of the software can be accessed through the keyboard. That's the integration that they're after. Let me just quickly load something up in order to demonstrate that. That was it, right there. Very, very simply, I loaded up an instrument and I was able to play it, arpeggiate it, and edit it just like a hardware synth. Yeah, that's the essence of it. Load up a preset, it loads up the GUI for you, all of the controls are mapped to the knobs, and you can instantly get to tweaking and playing and enjoying yourself making music. I mean, that's what we're after, yeah? We just want to get in there and start making music. Part of our reaction at the moment, the current sort of pushback against software, is that everything just takes too long. It's too fussy. You've got to set things up and map things about. And this is an antidote to that. You dial up a preset or an instrument, you just load it up and it's mapped and it's ready to go and you can play it immediately. That is what this is all about. Let me try something else. So again, load up, it's mapped to stuff, and you twiddle and you fiddle. I mean, it's immediately engaging. This is really something which has drawn me in. I mean, I find that this combination just invites you to play. It invites you to mess about. I mean, I've had Komplete software for years, all these synths and all this stuff, and you tend to find yourself just going back to the same ones over and over again, and the same sort of handful of presets, stuff you know, stuff you love. But with this, what I found playing with it the last couple of weeks is that it takes me on these little adventures where I just stumble into a preset, I load it up, and I just start to play. The same as you would, you know, wandering around a synthesizer show, and you find one, you plug in, and you just start playing, start fiddling with knobs. That's exactly the feel that I'm getting with this. It's great. I waste tons of time here, you know. Every time I sit down, I turn something on and I set it going, and you're off playing. I mean, that's what you want from an instrument, isn't it? Well, I think so. But there's a lot more to look at in here. And just because I'm enjoying this concept, it doesn't mean that the whole thing is fabulous. We shall see. Let's push on. Now, it's the Komplete Kontrol software which is at the heart of this entire system. If you don't like the Komplete Kontrol software for whatever reason, then you're not going to have a particularly good time, because it's a little bit vital, although you have to look at it a lot less. I mean, I'm no fan of the Native Instruments way of creating a browser. I mean, in here, this is not resizable. You've got this crazy small thing here that you're supposed to get through a gazillion different presets in. I don't find it very friendly. But that's where the keyboard steps in, because the keyboard gives you a different way of approaching it. And actually finding stuff on the keyboard is far, far simpler than finding stuff in the control software. And then when you've found what you're looking for, the control software just maps everything to where you want it to be. It bridges the gap between the software instrument and the piece of hardware. It's not like MIDI, where you have to map stuff and then save that as a mapping somewhere and then come back to that and try to remember what that was. No, it's kind of filling in all the gaps that MIDI leaves, because MIDI's a bit sort of dumb and stupid, really. So let's have a closer look at what's all going on here. So you have a browser button. The browser button gives you thumbnails of everything that Komplete Kontrol software has scanned and brought in to itself. This will be Native Instruments content and instruments, synthesizers, sample stuff, everything that's within Contact will be shown here as a separate thumbnailed instrument. There'll also be anything that supports NKS, which is Native Instruments' own proprietary platform that third-party developers can use to get in on the Komplete Kontrol action. But it does also support regular VST instruments, whether they're mapped or NKS supporting or not. They're still there. So let's go through our knobs, because this is where the majority of control is going to be. This first one is one of the most annoying knobs in the whole system. It's a category knob. And all it does is let you choose between all, drums and percussion, sample instruments, and synthesizers. Well, you know, those are categories, and that does help split down the presets a little bit, but it's not particularly descriptive. But the most annoying aspect for me is that whenever I reach out to browse or something, I always hit that one first, and it sort of makes me wait a second while it sorts itself out before I take the real knob, which is the one next to it, which lets me go through all the different thumbnails, all the different instruments. Whatever it is that's installed in here can be found by rotating this knob. As you can see on the left here, we have thumbnails. On the right, this is changing to the presets of that particular one that's selected. It's nice, it looks nice. This is also reflected in the software, but you know, you don't tend to be looking at that at this particular point. If I go back to the top, go back to all instruments, then we find that all of the presets are now on this knob here. Now the thing is that I have nearly 35,000 presets. 35,000! How on earth am I expected to find anything within that enormous library of sound? It's just ridiculous. Now Native Instruments have thought about that and given us a couple of ways to both drill down and also to narrow down our choices. First of all, you've got things like types. You can categorize everything. These are probably familiar over here in different bits of Native Instruments software where they show you different categories. You can choose categories and then types and then modes, whatever that all means. I mean, types of sound, I suppose modes is kind of how it's played as opposed to the type of sound that is, something like that. Anyway, all of this is here on the screen and allows you to drill down a bit. So for instance, for organ, I've only got 901 organ sounds to go through to find something awesome. But that at least is helpful. I've then got subtypes. So I can go down to accordion, digital organ, electric organ. Now it's getting together. Other organ, 186. 36 on pipe organ. Right, now we're talking. Actually get to something useful. So one of the ways of having a successful time within this ecosystem is getting into filtering down through type and mode. And basically having an idea of what you're after. I mean, normally speaking, I tend to use this side. I tend to choose the instrument that I'm after and then browse a preset. Because I'm kind of, I kind of know what it is that I'm after. I know the sort of instrument that I want. And then it's easier to browse individual presets within that instrument. For instance, I've got the ARP 2600 selected here. I can now wind my way through all the presets. If I hit the shift key, I can sort of jump up. So I'm not always just hitting around in the A's and the B's, but I can quickly fast wind up to the end and back again, and then take off shift just to move that a little bit slower. Now, there's a new, really very cool thing that Native Instruments have introduced with this Mark II, and that's something called pre here. There's a button here that says pre here, which is currently on, although that doesn't appear to be doing anything. That's because I'm currently got an Arturia synth selected, and that doesn't yet have this pre here facility built in. What the heck am I talking about? Well, let me show you. If I go over here to Absynth, for instance, and then start twiddling through, what you're hearing is a preview of every single preset. This is not loading up the instrument and playing it back to you or anything like that. These are samples. These are samples that Native have created of every single preset, and they've injected those into the software. Now, initially, I thought that was a bit of a gimmick. But no, actually, if I see, I do that all the time. I select that wrong knob all the time. It drives me crazy. If I go to something like Massive, for instance, that's got a nice 1600 worth of presets. That preview is enormously helpful. Otherwise, you're just going through names. If I select back onto an Arturia synth, I've got 2 oscillator octave, 3 oscillator bass, a tuned, a 3D, a 3 5th dimension, a 7 tone, bloody, and I have absolutely no idea what any of those sound like. Whereas if I pop back to Massive, that's brilliant. Say I just want a bass sound. See, and once again, I'm fiddling again. I'm playing, I'm drawing in, I just want to play with it. It's brilliant. So yeah, the pre here, I'm loving that. And so on. You see, I get just pulled in to these little adventures. And that's one of the interesting things about this, is that you do find yourself going through presets without really any connection to the instrument that they're associated with. And that doesn't matter. If you're just looking for a bass sound, you go through all the basses and it loads up whatever it needs to load up. And it's that, in many respects, is what takes you into things you didn't really expect. I mean, often you find it loading up a reactor patch that you've never even seen, or something that's in the dark recesses of Contact. And that sort of discovery, taking the presets out of the individual instruments, is actually quite interesting. But as I say, I also like to use the thumbnails more often than doing that. I find I get more done that way. I mean, one thing that I would say is that it would be really helpful if alongside the preset it told you where it came from. So at the moment I'm just going through stuff. I have no idea where it could come from. Does that matter? Kind of. It would help me make a more intuitive choice, I think, if it just said alongside it that that comes from a particular synth, just alongside another piece of text on this screen, which seems, a little bit underutilized. Let me demonstrate more clearly the connection between the control software and what's happening here. Let's load up, see, there's that knob again. Let's load up a good simple synth called Razor. There it is. Let's try to pick something interesting. That'll do. To load it, I hit this white button here that says load. I can also use this to do this, but you don't tend to. You tend to stay here. This, I find, I ignore completely until we get to DAW Control, where it does do a little bit more. So I'll load that up. And here is Razor. It's very simple. It's very nice. If I turn on the ARP and turn it to a chord, that's nice. Go back to the plugin. Now these 8 knobs here have been matched and mapped to these 8 knobs here. So I've got oscillator 1, oscillator 2, filter 1 and 2, some effects, and some modulators. Although that looks very simple, there's actually 16 pages of parameters. It says here 1 of 16. Now you access those other pages by hitting these 2 buttons over here, which goes to right and left. So hit that one, it maps out the next 8 parameters. It might not necessarily be 8, it kind of does it in groups. So here now I've got access to other bits and pieces. I can go another one along. I've got oscillator 2 on here. I've got the filter. Something to do with performance, I don't know. Now, the paging here can get a little bit boggling. You've got pages and pages and pages of stuff to go through, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what really is controlling what. I mean, the information you get here is okay, but I get like oscillator 1 and knob 1, knob 2, not a whole lot. And I also get data, and the data's not consistent. Like for instance, ratio here goes up to 32. I've got a knob that goes up to 32. So if I look at that and it says 11, I have no clue as to how far round that is until I get to know it. Contour here, for instance, goes up to 6 and to -6. So if I saw that sitting there at 2.6, would I think it was a little bit added to or a lot added to? I don't know. These knobs here seem to go from 0 to 1. So there's a lack of consistency in what the data's showing you, and then you've got no reference to know whereabouts that is on the scheme or the turn of the knob. But some help is at hand, and that's back in the software again. If you have a look up here, there's a little knob button just at the top. If you press that, it reveals what these are mapped to. So as I turn the knobs here, you can see the knobs move on the screen, which is great. I mean, that tells me at a glance exactly what these don't. And that, for me, is one of the places where this misses. So it's great that I got this knob here. It's great that I got this knob here. It's great that these two are mapped and talking to each other and are doing exactly the same thing. But in order to stay focused on the keyboard, I've just got a data and a label here. I don't have the same sense of where that knob is. You know, when I first got the keyboard, I fully expected that these knobs would light up. I thought there would be an LED all the way around which should show you, roughly where all those knobs are placed. But there isn't. I just get data. I mean, surely on this lovely high-res screen here, couldn't they transplant those knobs to here? So there's a picture of a knob above each knob. And then I could see at a glance exactly what everything was connected to. But instead I have to look up at the software. It's not a major deal. I mean, you are using the two together. It just seems that if you're using screens down here, then that's something that you could do, surely, because it's a screen, it's a graphic, it's exactly the sort of thing that you want to have here. But anyway, but what you do see is that I can now see what all the different pages are about. So the first page is macros, then oscillator 1, oscillator 2, filter, more filter stuff, and then another filtery stuff. And that allows me to select them or know what I'm going for much quicker than it does down here, because here I don't know what they are until I see it, whereas here I can see it straight away. Does that make sense? The other thing is, because I have a surface, I can actually just reach out and touch macros and I'm back on it again. That's pretty groovy. Or I want to go to filter 2, I can just tap on it and I'm there on filter 2. I'm not having to drop to a mouse in order to do that. That's one of the beautiful things about having a touch interface here for the software. So with this combination of having this bit open, I can see what the knobs are doing, I can select the thing that I want to play with, and that interaction there, that integration is really quite nice. But it's not all in the keyboard. This is a software keyboard combination kind of thing going on. Now what I don't quite understand is why we have this row of, at the moment, very dim white buttons at the top, because they don't seem to do anything in this software. I've got a magnifying glass here which just takes me back to the browser. I've got a dirty great big button here that says browser, so I don't need a button here that takes me back to the browser. It makes no sense. Whereas what I do have is a whole row of pages that it would be helpful to be able to get to on the keyboard. And look, I've got a whole row of buttons. Why could I not have those pages under these buttons? I mean, often there's more than 8 pages. This has 16 pages. Of course, that's fine. So you'd need some way of also paging the top bit. But to me, one of the things I'm finding in this is that both the screens and the knobs are kind of underused. And there could be a lot more going on here. I mean, ultimately, when you're looking at the screens with a plugin loaded, all you actually get is a thumbnail here to tell you what it is, and then its name here, in case you didn't know what that was. So the screens themselves are not really being used very much. I've got the name of the preset, I've got the data here, I've got a BPM counter for some reason. That's it. That's it. Surely there's more that could be going on these fabulous screens. Let's load up something else. Let's go for form. No, contour. No, form. Form. Let's go for form. Now in form, just to point this out quickly, it does have a little bit of light guide action. These are these lights along here because this has some articulations or some changes that you can trigger with particular notes. So the purple up here, that's generally where you can play normal notes. But this little blue section down here, which you should be able to see, changes these selections here, which are part of changing the articulation of the synthesis. Or in this case, the placement of whatever it is that this synthesizer is doing that I've never played with before. So that's a cool use of the light guide. It tells me exactly where those notes are, and it's always down the bottom end of the keyboard. So that's extremely handy. Now the layout and the availability of the parameters is completely editable. There's a little lock button here that if you tap that, click that, it unlocks all of the knobs so that I can select it and I can choose what it is that I want it to control. So if there's particular controls that I want at the first page, on for instance the macros page as it says here, I can do that. I can even add a new one. So I want to control formant. I will stick that there, and now that's here. The only thing is, if I move to another preset, it's gone. Come back to it. It's gone. Because you can't do anything about the global setup. You can't change how the manufacturer, how the maker of the plugin has mapped all these things. You can, as I showed you, add or change the parameter and its assignment, but then you have to save it. To do that, you've got to, as you saw it asked me if I wanted to save a moment ago, or I have to go here, save as, save as a preset. Let's bring this up. Let's call that number 2 and go save. And now that will appear as a preset, but not here, not in this browser. It will turn up in the user bank, which is a different place. And also it will no longer have an audition, or no longer have a pre here, because I don't have a facility in which to create that. So if I create my own user preset of something, there's no way that I can actually add a sample, at least not at this time. Right, let's have a quick look at the Arpeggiator and Scales. I've used it a lot already in this demo because they're just fun, aren't they? They're just really good. So the Arpeggiator then, they're over here on these 2 buttons. Get something a little bit chunkier. Then got some sequences. You can change how many octaves it's going through. Add a bit of swing. Also got a note repeat. So in Scales mode, it allows you to force a certain scale or mode onto the keyboard. Chords as well. Come to that in a moment. So you can choose, for instance, the mode that you want to use. Choose a Dorian mode. And then you have different key modes, whether you're being forced into using these notes or whether it's just guiding you to these notes using the LightGuide. So the LightGuide has now set itself to Dorian. And in this particular mode, any keys which are not within that mode do not play. I have another version which is mapped, and that will push it to the nearest note. So I can play anything, and it will be more or less right. Well, not more or less, it will be right. Which is a lovely thing. I mean, there's tons, there's all sorts of modes, there's world modes, jazz modes. And there's a lovely chord mode as well. The other thing you notice that when the Arpeggiator is on, that the lights light up as to what notes that it's playing. Which is a lovely thing. Now, the Komplete Kontrol software can also work its magic on instruments from third-party developers. provided that they support the NKS format. What does that mean? Well, NKS is Native Instruments' proprietary controller mapping software thingy that allows anyone to throw their plugins into the software and have the keyboards map perfectly to them. I've got the Arturia V collection, and those are all mapped, and so those are all packed within here. And when I first advertised the fact I was going to be doing this review, Rob Paben got in touch and said, oh, his synths are all mapped for NKS, and would I like to try those out? And I said, yes, that's great. And I asked him whether it was sort of much work to do, and he said, yes, it's an enormous undertaking because you have to map every single preset. And what I found is that all of his stuff comes with a gazillion presets. I mean, my preset count went up by about 10 grand just by installing a few of his synthesizers. So, you know, he's created work for himself in that respect because every single one has to be pre-mapped and pre-done. So there's a whole load of work in doing that. I mean, I don't know what he's going to do when it comes to creating samples for the pre here, because they haven't done that yet. And that's going to be one heck of a job, I should think. But there are quite a few third-party manufacturers who have done this. And when you're working with it, you can see the attraction because it really does do a brilliant job of integrating software instruments with hardware. Just like that, with no fuss, no messing about. It's there, it's mapped, it's ready to go. It's in this nice big list. You can dial it up, you can play with it, and you're off. Just by example, let's pull up some of Rob's stuff. Predator 2, that sounds like it might be interesting. Now, of course, there's no pre here, so I'm going to have to go on the name of the preset, or I just start something and I step through presets as it's loaded up. So let's go for Anavel Bias Jomal. Hit load. So if you look at any of Rob Paben's stuff, you'll notice that it's chocker full of stuff. Loads and loads of stuff on here, acres of it. So there's a lot that can be controlled. Some things are just easier to touch. And for a synthesizer as complicated as the Predator 2, what I find is happening is that I'm focusing on the knobs here and the knobs at the top. And so kind of the overwhelmingness of that GUI is being tempered slightly. That's kind of fading away into the background. I'm just concentrating on the main bits and pieces here that I can get through by this list. And that actually makes it a little bit easier to get to grips with. I mean, there's something to be said, sure, for diving around in the GUI and working out exactly what's going on in there. But just wanting to play, I just wanted to pick up the filter and bits and pieces, and I can easily do that with this system. Let's load up something from Arturia, say the SEM. Now I don't have the luxury of the pre here, but what I can do, if I set the art going again, I can step through presets with the preset buttons over here. So yeah, kind of lost in it again. That happens a lot. Happens a lot. I've been doing this for hours now. I've been here 3 days now making this video, and it's just because I keep playing with stuff, and then I find, oh, it's the morning again, and on I go, and I carry on, and here we are again after getting lost another fortnight playing with the SEM from Arturia. It's just the way of things. So yeah, third-party NKS synths are all in there, in the browser, in the preset list. Awesome, just boom, boom, off you go. Now, But that's not all. Oh no, not by a long chalk. There is support for VST Instruments as well, regular VST Instruments, ones which have nothing to do with Komplete Kontrol or Native Instruments and don't care for NKS. But because Native Instruments seem terribly offended by that, they sort of hide them away as if they're embarrassed of their lack of automatic mapping, which is odd because they have a stab at automatic mapping and often it can work very well. You find the VST plugins under this down arrow thing here at the top. Can you see that? I'll bring this down a little bit further so you can see it in the screen. Here, little down arrow, hidden away, that one. Plugins, look at that. Then it lists all the plugins in your system. Lovely, and all the ones that don't have anything to do with Komplete Kontrol. So for instance, if I bring up Wave Razor by Mock, which is a flipping awesome synthesizer, we will find that a lot of this stuff here is pre-mapped. Yeah, these have intelligently, I suppose, pulled out whatever it is that Wave Razor is saying it can use. So within Wave Razor it says you can use these knobs, and so it does, and it maps to them, and they're there beautifully. I've got 2 pages of them. I go to another page, I got some other stuff going on, which oh look over here, look, that sort of stuff. That's excellent. So why can't this be in the browser? It's not in the browser. I have to get it through this faffy menu coming down and get to it that way. It's not in the thumbnails. I don't understand why. Oh, I mean, I do understand why, because it doesn't support NKS, therefore officially it has no right to appear in this list of lovely, well-mapped stuff. But it works, and it's mapped, so why not have it in there? I don't know, I can't answer that question. However, you can sneak it in there by saving it as a preset. Save as Razor Trails, let's call this number 5. Now if I go to browser, I hit this button here, user, it now appears here. It gives it a thumbnail. I mean, it's a rubbish thumbnail. It actually reminds me of the thumbnail from Traction. Anybody remembers my review of that. But anyway, it appears there as a generic plugin, but it does mean that I can now access those presets. I mean, I've been doing this a little while, so I've got half a dozen presets in here now. And that's like a sneaky backdoor way of getting stuff into the S49, which is great. It gives you that hands-on control. You've got a way of going through the presets. You can find it, and you don't have to fiddle around in this menu up there. So that is a good tip, is to save it as a user, and then you've got it there within the system. This is a slightly different experience. This is the Lush 101 from D16. It's a great SH101 emulation. Unfortunately, when it pulls out all the parameters, it just calls them parameter 1, parameter 2, parameter 3, parameter 4. And that's it. And these aren't actually mapped to anything. There's nothing that moves in here. And so this is an example of perhaps why Native Instruments keep these hidden away a bit. It's because they don't show the whole system in its best light. So what can you do? What can you do? Well, you can then start using the good old-fashioned MIDI control. Because remember, this is also a dumb MIDI keyboard, and we can do dumb MIDI keyboard things. Now over here we have a button that says MIDI, and this is the one thing that's always available. And now everything has turned itself off, and you've just got your buttons and your knobs. That's it. But then that's kind of all you need. Now you used to set all this up in something called the controller editor, but that is now been folded into Komplete Kontrol, and you do it within here by pressing the little MIDI button. And that just reflects what's on here. You've got your knobs and you've got your buttons, and you can assign them and call them different things in order to map them to different things. You can just use them as they are. You don't have to call them anything. You don't have to change the assignment at all. But if you want to, you can do that within here. And you do it by changing templates. You can just add another template and off you go. You can't rename the template for some reason. I have no idea why, but you can create new ones for whatever you want. So you're just going to have to remember that template 3, which is what I've loaded here, is what I need for the Lush 101. So you should be able to see with this template loaded, I've named all of these for this row of the filter. So I've got cutoff, envelope, envelope, LFO, LFO, keyboard, resonance, all that stuff. Now if I go back to the plugin and turn on the Arpeggiator for a moment, come back to MIDI, I've now got fabulous control over the Lush 101 in a good old-fashioned MIDI style. No messing about with automatic mapping. Oh no, none of that stuff. I've had to map these by hand by selecting stuff, hitting MIDI learn and mapping it all in, and I've saved it as a template, and that just makes that easy. I mean, one thing that bugs me slightly is that when I hit MIDI, everything else disappears. Yeah, okay, because I only want to use the MIDI stuff. Yes, but there's other things that still work. So for instance, the Arpeggiator, I can't turn that on or off within MIDI mode. I have to go back to the plugin, put that on, then come back to MIDI. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's a little bits with the way that they've organized this so that I can't access stuff in MIDI mode that is just counterintuitive and even a little bit silly. At the time of making this video, the S49 only supports one DAW on Windows, that DAW being Ableton Live. On the Apple Mac, it also supports Logic and GarageBand. And they say apparently that Cubase and Studio One and other bits and pieces are coming along, but at the moment, Ableton Live is all we have, so that's all we can look at. And you run live and you go into mixer mode, then all sorts of things happen to your keyboard. All these lights light up, things you hadn't seen before, things like play, record, stop, loop, metronome, tempo, auto, quantize, undo, redo. All these little buttons light up, which is lovely because now we're in DAW control mode. Got a session loaded in Ableton Live, hit play, and off it goes. And the first thing you'll see is down here are these rather nice meters. And they are nice. I mean, the metering in Ableton Live is awful. It's rubbish, you know. It's been there forever and we're so tired of it. So this is really very nice. It's still a bit green, but there you go. The knobs then have become faders. Lovely. If I shift and move this thing forward, I can also get to control the panning. I've got mute and solo buttons here that I never knew existed before. I can hold that and I can mute stuff out. Bring it back in, or I can hold it and solo something. My big knob over here now starts getting a little bit of use. I can select different tracks with my white buttons at the top, which have also suddenly found something to do with themselves. And then I can control whatever it is that's selected with my big knob here. Hear that? Oh, I have to point this out. That is the clickiest, clunkiest turning ball knob that I have ever heard. I mean, you know, it's very intentional. You can definitely feel that that's turning, but gee whiz, what have they got in there? I don't know. Anyway, back to the session. You can use this knob to move around in the session. So if I push it from side to side, I can step through all the different tracks. And if I wanted to, I could pull down in one and push down to launch a clip. I mean, it's a little bit laborious doing it that way when I could probably just reach out and touch it and set it going that way, or use something like a launch pad, which would be a better way of doing it because it's difficult with a finger. But when it does get a little bit more interesting is when I come all the way over to the master here. I've got a a master fader obviously, but that's also here. That doesn't really make any difference. But what I can do now is I can launch entire scenes. So all of that's fairly cool. You've got some, I mean, the levels and the metering within these screens here is fabulous. I love that. It's a shame that it's all green, but never mind. It's really very nice. You can select different tracks, you can mute and solo stuff. There's performance elements in here which are pretty groovy. I'm into all of that. Messing around with this knob here, you know, snapping through stuff up and down through clips. Yeah, that works, but it's not the quickest or most efficient way to do that sort of thing. Maybe launching scenes and stuff is perhaps a bit more useful. But that is kind of all the control you get. There's not like, you know, Mackie control over EQ or any VST instruments or any of the devices that are there. But of course you can always drop into MIDI mode again, and then I've got, if I go back up to my regular template, I've got a MIDI thing. I can turn on MIDI, I can turn on this knob here, I can twist it, and then I'm controlling that knob there, you know, MIDI control. We know that, that's how that works. No bother, you can do that. But the sort of the integration, the automatic stuff is pretty basic. Now you can of course use a Komplete Kontrol software within Ableton Live, so let me show you how you do that. Now you would assume that you press plugins and drag Komplete Kontrol into your session. No, that's not what we do. If you do that, which you can do, you have problems where the DAW control functionality and the Komplete Kontrol functionality start to clash with each other, and one drops from one to the other and doesn't let you do one of the ones that you were trying to do because it's then trying to do the other thing. So that doesn't work. However, they have worked around it by using an instrument rack. So instead of loading the plugin, you go to Instruments, Instrument Rack, and there it is there. And we installed this earlier, and it's vital that you do so, otherwise the whole thing just doesn't work. So you can then drag that in to a new track, and now you have exactly the same control as you did before. Let's this time bring up some drums and percussion. We'll enable the metronome, and we'll push down on here in order to create a clip into which we will record. So within Ableton Live, with the keyboard, using those synths, once you've kind of got your head around the workflow, then you can do pretty much everything from the keyboard. You can start writing pieces, making tunes, making loops, recording your clips. All that sort of stuff can be done directly from within this environment. I mean, there is something really great about going through different instruments in a project, and every time you select a different instrument, it's already mapped, it's all ready to go. So you can tweak any instrument you like straight away without having to remap, without having to reassign, without having to rethink about anything. It's all just there. And so I think the workflow that they're trying to push at you could be enormously useful. One last feature to mention in passing then is that the Komplete Kontrol S49 fully supports Maschine. It's designed to be a complement to Maschine. You know, Maschine is that square hardware thing with pads on. The new version of the Mark III has the same screens as the S49, and it's designed for beat making and live performance and creating extraordinary musical productions on. However, playing tunes, playing lead sounds, bass sounds on those little pads is perhaps not the best approach. And so with the companion S49 keyboard, you can then play all of those leady and paddy bits, all of the, I guess, the non-drum parts, perhaps much better on a proper keyboard. So that's the idea. Although I think I've discovered that it does a heck of a lot more than that. The Maschine software is only available with Maschine hardware. You can't buy it separately. So you have to have a Maschine before you can use the S49 with the Maschine software. But here I am going to be using the Maschine software completely separately and only with the S49. My Maschine is over in the corner somewhere. I'm just going to use the keyboard. But what I want to show you is that when you run the Maschine software with the S49, the whole keyboard comes alive. So what am I saying then? Well, what I'm saying is that the integration between the S49 and Maschine is fabulous. It's complete. It's totally there. It's total integration. It works brilliantly. Everything has come alive. I've got all these buttons down here that didn't work before. Now they work. I've got the mixer. It's all colourful. I've got things flashing over here and stuff mapped. I can browse through things. I can add plugins, I can mix, I can swap between different groups, and I can even add effects, which is something that you can't do in the control software. But all of this begs the question, why is the Maschine software not available with the S49? I don't need the Maschine, I don't need the thing, I can just use this. I've got everything I need to play instruments, to play drums, to play percussion, to play leads, bass, whatever I want. It's all here. So why can't I have the Maschine software? And I did ask them about this, and they said, well, you know, you don't get to use all of the facilities of Maschine with this. Maschine is its own instrument, and that gives you the fullest, most complete experience of recording with the Maschine software. Okay, yeah, I can understand that, but you can do almost all of it with this, and yet if I don't have the Maschine hardware, I cannot access this software. Maddening. Very strange. I mean, Maschine software isn't perfect. You know, it has its oddities and slight weirdness about it, and the workflow through the keyboard into Maschine isn't exactly the same that it is on the Maschine hardware, because they're not sort of at the moment exactly designed for each other. But I imagine that perhaps a forthcoming Maschine version 3, I don't know, maybe, what they should do is make the two more seamless, more compatible, sort that out so that they can run by themselves and you can buy that as an upgrade to this keyboard. I think that's perfect, because suddenly in using this together you think, well, there's a load of stuff missing from other DAWs. I mean, Ableton Live, I could only do a few bits and pieces. Some of these lights don't even light up except for in Maschine. well, you know, there you go. I don't know. I don't know what that's about, but there you are. But if you have Maschine, therefore having the software, the keyboard is a great companion to that. Absolutely it is. It works. You don't even have to use the Maschine hardware in order to get the best, at least as far as I can see, out of the Maschine software. I mean, and this bit here, this, as you can see in this camera here, I've got a bunch of effects that are loaded in because the effects are there within Maschine itself, and those can be added to the instruments that are loaded, which is great. You can't do that in the Komplete Kontrol software. In fact, that highlights one particular flaw in the Komplete Kontrol software, is that you can only access one instrument at a time. You load one instrument, one preset, you play it, you have fun with it, you go on adventures with it, you go off into the hills and come back and talk about the amazing adventures that you had. But you can only do it with one. You can't layer them up, you can't add effects or other plugins to it. Even instruments like in Kontakt, which have its own effects engine built into the Kontakt architecture, that's not available. You can load up that one particular sound bank and change that, and if it has some effects within that synthesizer, within that sampled instrument, then you can use those. But you can't route it through an insert effect, through another effect, or add another plugin to it. And that's a deficiency, I suppose, in the Komplete Kontrol software, because their biggest competitor, which, let's face it, is the Akai VIP software, that is what that does. That's its kind of main key selling point, is that you can create these huge multis of lots of different synths patched together with effects and create enormous sounds. This does not do that. The Komplete Kontrol software does not do that. It focuses on one thing at a time and lets you do that very, very well, mapped perfectly, brilliantly. That all works. But I would just so like to just drop a delay in there, or a reverb, or something else while I'm playing with it standalone. I think that would be really good. Otherwise I've got to open up a DAW and run it through there, and then I don't have this control over those effects. Unless I was running a Maschine, and then I could do that. But let me do one of these terrible instant off-the-cuff songwriting things, just to show you how the keyboard and Maschine can work very well together. Empty project, sound number 1, hit browser. I want to be in instruments, which is here. Let's take a drums and percussion and take punch. Let's take a dance kit. That'll do. Load that up. Okay, I've got a drum kit to use. If I hit record, it creates a pattern at the top. If I hit the pattern button here, I can then change that length to something sensible, like 4 bars. I'm going to want the metronome on, and I'm going to want to shift record in order to give me a count in. Hit quantize. This time I've got a choice here of quantization. Oh, a little bit craziness going on, but never mind. and then come down to the next sound, hit the browser again. This time I want a bass sound, so I'm going to go back to Monarch, go for bass. Go back to my acid, I think, load that up. Go to the plugin, hit the auto button. Pattern to go down to the next sound. Go to browser with Alicia Keys. It goes with plugin. Then I'm going to add a delay to that. The only thing you can't do in here is edit this information, edit these patterns. So I can look at them, I can move them around, I can zoom in and out, that kind of thing, but there's nothing I can do to move those notes on the keyboard itself. Nothing here, can't do up and down, none of that can work. I can change the length of the pattern, I can change what we're looking at, but I can't actually edit notes on the keyboard itself. But then I guess that's why I've got a computer attached. So Native Instruments are trying to build a workflow with this keyboard. They're trying to integrate it with their enormous suite of software to enable you to better explore those sounds and to make music easier and quicker. I mean, for me, what it does is it pulls that whole thing together. I mean, Komplete Ultimate that I've had for several years is just so enormous that there's no way that you're going to find every possible sonic combination of those sounds. And what I like about this is the way that it enables you to have a stab at that. It pulls you in, it gives you the opportunity to discover sounds in ways that you've never thought of before, using synths that you've never thought of before, patches within Reactor that you've never discovered, presets that you never come across before because now you are dialing through them and they're throwing themselves at you. It somehow takes the enormity of the whole Komplete experience and turns it into a playable instrument. I mean, I wasn't really expecting that. I wasn't really expecting to be drawn in like that. I thought, great, MIDI keyboard, play some stuff, a little bit of DAW control. Oh, look, I could play with some knobs. And that's all fine. I expected all of that. What I didn't expect was these journeys that I went on, the rediscovery. I mean, I've been largely bored by software sounds. I confess, absolutely. My whole journey into Eurorack and into hardware is a pushback, is a reaction against the kind of the dull quality of software synthesis. And yet, it's not that the sounds were bad, it's just I was bored of the journey. I had kind of given up finding anything cool and exciting within the enormous sound palette that I have before me. But something like this has pulled all that back together. It's taken the mass sort of landscape of sound that you can't find your way through and brought it back into an instantly accessible, instantly tweakable and hardware-like experience. I've kind of rediscovered the joy of software synthesizers. So to sum up my overinflated and extraordinarily deep dive into what is essentially a MIDI controller keyboard is a great piece of hardware. Feels like a synth, behaves like a synth, good, rugged stuff. Yeah, no problem with all of that. Feels great, looks great. Yes, the lighting effect I think is actually genius in there somewhere. The way that the different buttons light up, depending on what you're doing, it's just great once you're into it. The light guides here are pretty in a disco while we play kind of way, and do become useful when you're using sample-based instruments that show articulations or the layout of samples or other controls within the synthesizer. But it's only sort of this far away from being a bit of a gimmick. The support for NKS instruments is excellent. That's all in there. It's seamless. You wouldn't even know that it's not a native instrument synth, except for the fact you don't get the previews quite yet. But that, hopefully, will be coming. The dumb MIDI support is there. It's usable. It's basic. It sort of just does the job. The DAW Control in Ableton Live is all right. It's there. The mixing, metering on here, excellent. Love all of that. But you only really get control over level and panning. There's not a whole lot else going in there. You are able to create clips and record into them using the keyboard, and then to load up another instrument and create another clip. So it has some half decent functionality in terms of creating within Ableton Live. It's a shame it's not supported in more DAWs yet. Hopefully we will see that down the line. But I think if DAW Control is your focus, if that's the one thing that you're after, then there are probably better options out there for a controller keyboard that has more integrated DAW control. The screens are great, clear, bright, lovely to look at, but perhaps underutilized, except for when in Maschine, which not everyone is going to get to use. Certainly the ability to browse through all of the instruments and to drill down all the types and modes is far superior on the keyboard than it is in the software. They can both do the same thing, but it's so much easier to do that on the keyboard, I find, than it is in the software, because I've found that it's opened up the whole of Komplete to me much more than this editor librarian side of things does. It's also forced me to use it more intelligently, using all the different subdivisions and categories and diving down into finding the presets that I'm after. Sometimes using the synth that I'm after, or sometimes just scrolling through different types. And I've not really done that before with Komplete, so it's sort of taking me by the hand and showing me a better way to discover sounds. The pre-hear previews of the sounds is excellent. Everyone should have it. It should be on everything. It has speeded up my access to sounds enormously. I know you can step through presets once you've got a preset loaded, but just fast winding through going, oh yeah, yeah, that is excellent. I love it. I didn't think that I would. I thought it was a bit of a sort of cheesy gimmick, and I was so wrong, because it's a fantastic thing. I like the performance controls, the arpeggiator and the scale. Arpeggiators are always fun. They're always nice to have that there to press a button and have a little few settings on it. Fantastic. Vital thing on any keyboard, really. And the scale thing is really nice because it does allow you to play without really having to worry about it. I do have questions though. I have questions like, why not include regular plugins in the browser? Why not let us take a little thumbnail and stuff that in? Why not give us access to that kind of thing so we can build it into a more comprehensive library? That would be great. And then let us add little samples of the presets so we can pre-hear our way through as well. That would also be ace. Why can't we have pictures of knobs on the screen rather than just the data? Well, both, ideally, so that I can tell at a glance what those knobs are set to. The data just doesn't do that. It doesn't do that. You need a picture of the knob or lights around the knob or some other indication of what those values are pointing to. But perhaps my two biggest criticisms are, firstly, the lack of any kind of multi, the fact that I can't layer up instruments and I can't add effects, like what you'll find with the Akai VIP software. And secondly, that the awesome Maschine software isn't available separately for it, either as an upgrade or thrown into the box. Either way, it's a brilliant little piece of sequencing, mixing and recording software that works fabulously with this keyboard. It brings the entire keyboard to life. It's the only time that all the buttons are lit and doing stuff. And I cannot work out for the life of me why it's not included with it. If you use Komplete and or Maschine, then without a doubt this is the keyboard you should get. If you're looking for focused DAW control, then perhaps it's worth looking at some alternatives. I hope some of my prattling on has been helpful in your decision making over whether or not to buy such a keyboard. And if you have any questions or comments, then please stick them down below. Thanks for watching, and in the meantime, go and make some tunes.